All right. Welcome to Ed Leaders, the podcast covering all the interesting ideas about leadership, strategy, culture, and the business of K-12 education, where we believe with better leaders we'll make better schools. I'm your host, Luke Kelly, and joining me each week in the chair is my co-host and former colleague, Matthew Irving. Matthew, good morning. Welcome. How are you today, my friend?
Good morning, listeners. I'm fantastic. It's wonderfully cool this morning, so I'm very happy.
It's always cool in Albany, mate. It's cold.
Well,
Don't pretend it's cool.
It's been pretty hot recently, I must say.
Now, listeners, what you don't know is Matt has a new regime. He has a morning regime. Tell us about the morning regime. Have you been up doing your morning regime, Matthew?
I have been up doing my morning regime. It is walk out the front door. Walk out the front door before you do anything, and just sit and breathe. A little bit of meditation, and then I'm ready to go to start. It's been wonderful, and this morning, as I said, it's a little cold, which is beautiful.
It's a new Matt, everybody. It's a new Matt. All right. On to today's guest, Stuart Robinson, Director of Morningtide Consulting. Stuart has been in education for more than 25 years, managing the business of schools. He served as a business manager in WA before he and his wife, Deborah, and family moved to Victoria, where they vowed they would never leave. But Stuart has served on multiple boards, NFPs, and loves operating within the executive and governance space. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Luke and Matthew. It is an honour to be here. I really respect your show and I've listened to most of your podcasts. They're absolutely brilliant. So well done.
Well, thank you very much. Love to have people who have listened to the show on the podcast. But you know, we do love to start the story with your story, the journey. Tell us about your professional journey in education.
I'm going to start right back at when I left school at year 10. At the end of year 10, I had enough of school, and if fair to say, I think school had enough of me, and so we amicably parted ways. I did a cooking apprenticeship and became a qualified chef, and was in that for a number of years until my eldest son was born, and realised that hospitality hours were not exactly conducive to family life. So I did a rethink on that, and that's when I went to university, studied a Bachelor of Business in Accounting and Marketing. The two very opposite ends of this business spectrum, but I loved the idea of business, so I really wanted to get involved in that. Towards the end of finishing that degree, I took on my first business manager role at a school in WA, regional WA, where I stayed for nearly 20 years. I planned to leave every 5 to 7 years, and then something cropped up that seemed too exciting to miss. So I kept going, but it was great. Towards the end of that, I studied my MBA in leadership, focusing on strategy, and then came to Victoria for a gig on Phillip Island, of all places, at New Haven College. Stayed there for about 4.5 years, and then I took on some locum work while I was setting up Morningtide, and I've been working with a few schools throughout Australia since.
All right. Well, we're about to get in the elevator and give you 60 seconds to get to the top floor and tell us about Morningtide.
Yeah, okay. Look, we're obviously a strategy consultancy that's primarily aimed at working with independent schools in every state and territory in Australia. So we will go anywhere. Our purpose is simple but ambitious, and that is to help school leaders design the future of their schools with utmost clarity and confidence. We don't do cookie cutter plans. We don't do jargon-filled reports that will sit on your shelf and gather dust. We bring a sharp, structured approach that's rooted in business strategy, but tailored for education, so that schools can move from good intentions to great execution. That's the desire. And at the heart of it all is our trademarked RIDGE framework, which guides schools through the full strategic process of review, inspire, design, goals, and execution. In short, Morningtide exists to turn strategic thinking into real-world progress for schools. Did that cover in 60 seconds?
Nice. Yeah, pretty
Wow.
good. All right, Matt.
Wow, that's very impressive. We've often asked that question, but that was very tight, Stuart. Well done.
Thank you.
I want to start right at the beginning. Where do you start the journey with schools, or where should they start their journey of developing a strategic plan in your mind?
Yeah, look, obviously I just touched on the RIDGE framework, and that's come about because I think I've seen a lot of schools start at a very similar place where it's a very typical thing where boards and exec get together on a weekend retreat, most possibly, or a midweek retreat, and they will sit and plan some strategy from whatever data they've cobbled together. I like to take schools back 2 steps. And the first one is review, where we're looking at reviewing how your last strategic plan went and was it successful? Is there learnings to come out of this? Where would you like it to go next time? Things like that. And then the next stage is about inspire, which is then turning from the rear view mirror into a full forward mirror, perspective, looking at the next 20 to 30 years in scenario modelling. What's coming down the track? What are the mega trends that could affect our school and so on?
And I'm kind of interested. You talked earlier about it's rooted in business principles of strategic planning, strategic thinking. One of the observations I always have in schools is around this notion that the strategic plan is an outward-facing document, and often is trying to capture the sentiment and tell the story to, your stakeholders and your potential parents in the future about where you want to move to. But generally in business, you would never do that. You would never kind of outline to your competitors and signpost to your competitors, oh, we're working on this little, unique kind of, widget or program or whatever, and this is going to revolutionize this industry. You wouldn't necessarily do that until it's released. So I'm wondering if you could shed any light on your thoughts on that notion of, is a school strategy really a strategic plan, or is it more of a kind of a marketing prospectus document at times?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's some historical context here as well, I think, that schools seem to rely on. If I could encapsulate it in one quick sentence, I think real strategy begins with uncomfortable questions, whereas a strategic plan for marketing purposes starts with Photoshop. And so they're very different ways we go about it. The idea with where does this come from and why schools do this and corporates don't is more because I guess we see, certainly in the government sector, government schools will often post their SIPs, their school improvement plans. And so perhaps there's been a bit of a follow-on to that. I think there's also a level of schools wanting to signal status in terms of how do we market to our stakeholders, as you've touched on, Luke. And there's also a little bit of collaboration theatre perhaps going on in that, okay, we're doing this, maybe teachers and parents from other schools are looking at this and wanting to see what we're doing and how they can integrate it or copy it, or so there's a little bit of that. But I think certainly if there are savvy competitor schools out there, they would be looking at this stuff and really learning from it, trying to dissect what that school is doing. And so, yeah, it is odd that happens. I think a real strategic plan versus just your strategic plan, I think is the major difference first is understanding strategy. And I think if you understood strategy, then planning would come from that. It doesn't start with your strategic plan. So if you're schools that are really wanting to make an impact in this, not just on students but on their own organisation, are those that realise that to truly succeed, they inevitably need to change and to get crystal clear, make crystal clear choices. I think just as an example for this, IKEA, which speaks about design matters, is really helpful for this because you can see it in everything they do. They coordinate every part of their organisation. And so when you look at it, you don't need to go on IKEA's website to find out what their strategy is. You can see it working its way out through what they do. And I think that's the same for schools. I think we don't need to look on a website to see what they're planning to do or what they're innovating. You start to see it by what's actually coming out. What are the outcomes?
Stuart, so interesting, that comment. I was sitting with my marketing manager, and we've developed this new strategic plan. We often see principals doing this sort of camera shot. They tell the sort of community what the strategic plan is, and they just sort of rabbit on, and you've lost interest in the first 10 seconds. And we were talking about,
Sure.
should we do that? And our question was, why? Why? Like, how would that be impactful, and how would that help our community? And then we went,
Exactly.
actually, it's about translating our strategic planning to stories that
Yes.
people just start to hear, but they start to see. So I don't know if that kind of resonates with what we're saying. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, storytelling is obviously paramount in strategy. I think if you mention strategy around the main populace of people, I think they would glaze over within about the first 10 seconds. So for those of us who, I'm including you, Luke, and Matthew, who love strategy and love to think strategically, it's exciting stuff to talk about. But certainly to bring that back into things that we can talk about and grow our community's understanding of our strategy is to depict that in story, share what the outcomes will look like, rather than here's the list of 10 goals and lag measures that we're going to put behind them, and this is what you will be doing for the next 3 to 5 years. I think story really invokes that, hopefully that emotion and passion, and there's a compelling argument behind those stories to move forward.
Just to take that a step further, I'm kind of thinking about that storytelling, and I'm thinking about staff, and I'm thinking about that, I guess, that difference between, a principal having the inspiration for where they want the vision of the school to go, and that gets created, maybe in conjunction with an executive leadership team, or maybe it gets, gets created in conjunction with a council or a school board. But then there's this element of, are they creating it with staff? And how important is it or not for staff to understand or be part of that process? Can staff get their head out of, let's call it, the weeds, to think strategically or to learn how to think strategically? And if you're not willing to go on that journey with your staff, is there a risk of kind of coming off as though I'm the czar and I know where we're going, and then you don't take all the staff with you, and then it's your vision and your strategic plan, but not the staff's genuine collective buy-in to that strategy?
Of course.
Wondering where you guide people into in terms of that space.
Yeah, of course. Look, I think stakeholder involvement, so staff, parents, the wider community, students, obviously, have a part to play in strategy, because obviously it's for them and it's by them. They need to be able to engage with where the school is going. And so if there's no buy-in from those stakeholders, then obviously your strategy will falter at the first hurdle. And so there's, I guess, in each part of our review process, we like to engage with those stakeholders at some level, giving them a voice, giving them some understanding, letting the story, as we've been talking about, build with them, and so they can see that, okay, why is this happening? Where are we going to? Is this promised land actually going to be better for us, or is it just leadership mantra that is really about ticking boxes or looking like we're working at something significant, but not really. So I think there's really getting into the buy-in, and that doesn't mean obviously that you're going to sit down and have one-on-one conversations with every one of these stakeholders. It's just not possible. Even though some of these stakeholders would obviously love that, staff are probably more so, depending on where they see their value as a stakeholder. And so we need to find ways to to engage them that is meaningful and purposeful, and that can start to contribute, and they can then start to see their fingerprints on the strategy as it evolves.
Stuart, one of the things, we're talking about staff engagement, and having been part of this sort of process before of developing a strategic plan, there's often a tension that exists between sort of the business arm of the school, and then there's sort of the educationalist side of the school. And, the strategic plan needs to have all these sort of goals around teaching and learning, etc. And then, the business manager puts their hand up and goes, hang on, we need, business continuity, and, where's our risk and where's governance? And then you'll have council members that sort of take each side. How can those things sort of coexist? And where have you seen that done really well?
Yeah, fantastic question. Yeah, you've obviously experienced that as well, I'm assuming, Matthew. I think it's
I don't know what you're talking about, Stuart.
it's super common in schools, isn't it? I think, look, if I could take a school somewhere, it would be to get a single goal for their school. And so that is, it's taken out of Sean Covey's book, The Four Disciplines of Execution, where he talks about WIGs, or wildly impossible goals, or wildly important goals. And I guess often we try to, as schools, we'll try to set up these areas and go, okay, we'll do the pillar of academia, we'll do the pillar of student well-being, we'll do the pillar of facilities and resources, and they're gonna operate in silos because they're all managed by different things. A school is a whole, and it does everything. Obviously, it educates children, and that's the prime reason for it. But if it's not functioning well, it can't do that job. And so the strategy and the goal, the singular goal, has to be one that is all-encompassing. So that's probably where I would take it. I think we can then drill down from that level, but really that's where we need to start. And so yeah.
What does that look like in reality? Because sometimes there's schools have that overarching, statements like, we're going to improve well-being, or like, we're going to increase our academic performance, or they're super broad as opposed to super niche, where that super niche kind of strategy can be very deliberate and like, we're going to own, we're going to be the best athletic school. And the best football school and the best hockey school, and we're going to be known for that. And like, we're still going to do some academics, but they're not going to be the general kind of thing. And I'm wondering how you see those general statements, like motherhood almost, in a strategic plan versus kind of the super niche ideas in a strategic plan.
Yeah, great. Look, I think to give you an example of one great goal that I've been part of recently is that the school is basically looking to become the leader in social emotional learning, and that's their number one goal. That is an all-encompassing goal because it talks about curriculum, it talks about resourcing and governance and risk and all these other areas, because out of that singular goal, there will be team goals that fit in and then align back to that. So that you would have a curriculum team goal, which is, I can't think quite off the top of my head right now, but it would be something that is very, it would point back at that singular goal and would be able to start setting up other measurements for that and plans to go forward.
So Stuart, just, let's say you've got the whole team together, the school's got super clear about that one goal. How does it translate then to audience? And so I'm a current parent and I see the goal of the school strategically is to be a leader in social emotional learning. And let's say I'm a prospective parent and I see that. Am I really engaging that? Or is it really a school being super clear where they're going? Like, just in terms of audience, how does that translate?
Yeah. Okay. So look, if you're a mainstream school that hasn't gone down the path of niching your strategy, and you're trying to appeal to um, all people, then a goal like that would never work. You would blow everybody out of the water. But for a school that is purposefully being driven in that space, and their target audience is students with social emotional learning, then it is critical for parents. Parents would find that exactly what they're after, because here is a school that's stating who their client is and where they're wanting to go. And certainly most parents would be on board with that, thinking, yes, well, this is going to benefit my child, because these guys aren't just going to be working at a base level. They're going to be stepping it up and really want to build in best practice. So, yeah. But, yeah, I agree with you. I think if you if you're a mainstream school with 2,500 students and you decide that you're going to earmark one specific segment within that school, that I think you'd miss the point. And I think parents would have a fair concern. Absolutely.
When you're thinking about that strategy formation, and imagine that, probably principals at different stages of their journey may become more interested in that strategic plan or that strategic vision, either, when they've just started, they're either adopting one, or they've been kind of instructed to do away with the old strategy and create the new. So I imagine a lot of principals coming into that first, second or third year of their principalship are the ones that are probably reaching out for some guidance around developing or working on a strategy. How do you think about getting them to elevate from that kind of senior leadership role that they may have had before, where it might not have been to direct strategy? And how do you get them to think about kind of short-term versus long-term in terms of what the kind of outcomes that they might be looking for?
I have a tool which I use when I'm helping schools with this, and it's called a time cone. And it was developed by Amy Webb, who's a futurist over in the US, who's also been a professor at Harvard. And the time cone gives us an idea about what strategy is and what tactics are, and timelines and risk and certainty and so on. While this is not a visual medium, if I can just quickly explain it, it's a set of two axes that are 45 degrees rather than a 90-degree axis. And on one axis is time periods, on the other one is data evidence and certainty, moving from more to less. And so in that, there are four actual time cones we talk about. The first one is tactics, which is the first 1 to 2 years. The second is actually strategy, when we're looking out further for about 2 to 5 years. Vision, about 5 to 10 years. And then we're starting to look at systems evolution out past 10 years. So I'd be explaining to a principal in that scenario, look, you will most likely do tactics and operate in that space. And when we're talking about strategic plans for schools, they are most commonly action plans. They're things that we list 100 different things that we want to achieve over the next period of time. We set them up with time zones and so on. But that's not strategy. That's your tactics. Really, you can do those kind of things and still make some impact into what you're doing. Far better if you have a strategy driving that, because then it's everything you do is aligning with it, and you're going back and to understand how those tactics will impact a strategy. And then the same with your vision. If your vision is even more significant than your strategy, then you can work in that space as well. And finally, your systems, which are kind of take a long time to put in place, and they're a big piece that you can't change with tactics. So I guess when I'm talking to them about tactics, I'm saying, look, the things that you change here, you have to be really careful. If you don't have a strategy or a vision and your system's placed up, then over time, in that time continuum, they will affect your systems. And so, for example, if we were to look at a school who was struggling with fees, struggling with enrolments, and the first thing they wanted to look at was fees, because other competing schools have got lower fees than them. So the tactic might be, okay, let's reduce our fees, and so that might be fine, and it might help in the initial, time period, but you have to think as well that that's actually could really affect your systems level evolution back out at 10 years. It's the almost the butterfly effect, isn't it? That we what you do today could impact out there. So if it's not strategic about it, then so I would always be encouraging principals to think longer term, much longer term, about what they're doing. Yeah.
And Stuart, do you got any sense then, we talk about, we've seen so many times in schools, death by action. And what we're saying is perhaps death by tactics. And what kind of, you talked about encouraging people to look beyond. How might you take a principle from tactics to strategy? What does that conversation look like when you're having it?
Yeah. I think it's certainly very diplomatically. Let's start there. Um, I think we need to, look, there's a bit of education perhaps that needs to go on in terms of that time cone, and that's why I like it as an example. It's really easy to explain and see, and I think it starts to drive the mindset into a far more longer term, more driven and purposeful discussion, rather than just, okay, we need new toilets, or we need an oval, or the kids need more laptops or something like that. I think it's kind of why. It's always asking those questions. Why are we doing that? Where are we going? Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question that probably harks back to your business manager role, and it's actually something that Matt and I were talking about on the phone last night, as we tend to do on a weekly basis, debriefing about where we're at in our journeys. And one of the things that we were talking about last night actually is the dollarizing of a strategic plan, and the thought about how much of, like you've just described, your tactics and your strategies and your vision, but how much of the tactics and strategies, or how much time a school really takes on dollarizing those tactics and strategies, and thinking about in the long term, what does these tactics mean, like you've just described, for the vision or the systems evolution in 5 to 10 years' time. If we do all of these things in the next 2 years, and we've now added in, I'm just going to say 3 FTE, and XYZ in terms of, some equipment to do those programs, 7 to 10 years down the track, now those programs are costing us $500,000 or $1 million, and now it's an expectation of your school. And I'm getting at how much time and energy and effort should schools spend at the strategic planning time or strategic thinking time, dollarizing strategy. And does it happen? And have you seen it happen very often?
No, I haven't seen it happen often. But look, I think it's probably it's a chicken and egg problem. Which comes first, the strategy or the budgeting? Now that completely conflicts with me as a business manager, obviously, as an accountant. I think conservative accountants want to know where the dollars are going and how they're being spent before we start committing to these things. But I think it's if we could answer it probably more from the idea that it's all about capabilities. So if a school has the capabilities, or is willing to have their capabilities assessed, then it becomes an easier proposition to then start talking about how we're going to resource it. So let's say, we don't have the buildings or the facilities to actually do what we're wanting to do in strategy. It may be that then brings your strategy back to ground, or it becomes part of your strategy to go, okay, well, this is so paramount to our strategy that we actually need to make it happen. How do we do that? And so that's why I guess I'm saying it's like a chicken and egg problem. It's which one comes first. I think if you only ever looked at your resources and what you had now, I think you limit your future. But at the same time, if you only ever think of the future and you don't think about the here and now, you can cause yourself some serious problems. So both are relevant. So in essence, I don't know how to answer your question, Luke. It's a good question, but I think that's just the tension of the discussion in strategy is really how do we fund it and where does that all lie? Yeah.
And maybe one way of thinking about it is if someone had gone through that time cone, if you like, and gone from strategy to vision, systems, etc., maybe their vision cast what that investment's going to look like. Luke and I might argue that people often don't do that. Actually, more readily, not that they don't do that. But let's say they've thought about it. Is maybe just capturing how much that's costing us year on year. Let's say we're 1 or 2 years into that strategy, we actually then get the greatest sense of what that cost will be and that on cost. Maybe sometimes it's not until you're in it that you truly know. I'm not sure, that might be another way of thinking about it.
Yeah, look, totally agree. I think it's like, even though it is a chicken and egg scenario, I think the two need to be hand in hand as you move forward. There needs to be, and as with any data really, as you're moving through a strategic process, is to understand what it is you can do by what you're limited by, as well as understanding, well, okay, are we capable of being able to push that envelope out, knowing that is going to be a stretch for us. So yeah, there is that obvious tension in that. But you're right, I think moving side by side on those things, if you were just to have a conversation about strategy and be completely devoid of looking at the financial ramifications of the decisions you're looking at, I think you would be ill-informed. Yeah.
Where do metrics play a position in strategic plans? Whether that's, we want enrollments to hit 1,500 in 5 years, or we want to invest, $50 million in buildings in the next 10 years. Where do those kind of metrics, or even, we want ATAR level to be, 90, any kind of metric that you can kind of link back to an educational or school-related outcome, where do they fit?
Yeah, sure. Look, super important. And I understand measurement in schools is not a beloved thing unless we're assessing a student. Then it's loved. I think if we look at it organisationally, nobody likes it. But look, it is a difficult thing to do. And rewarding it, as we see in corporate, is even harder to do. But I don't think that either of those complexities should stop us doing them. I think they need to be well thought out and well considered. In schools, we really love what we call lag measures, the things that tell us what we've achieved and when we've achieved them. So to give an example, a school might have a lag measure, a KPI, that their study score for their Year 12 cohort is going to be, they're going to have a study score of 35, let's say. That's pretty high across the board. The problem with that lag measure is it can only ever be measured at one point in time, and that is when we've done it. So when we've done it, that's it. There's nothing more we can do to change it. We know it. Either it came in under 35 or above 35 or on 35. We don't know until we've got there. And so that's the problem with lag measures. So I always talk to schools about lead measures, and these are far more predictive. Lead measures are, they help us understand how we're progressing towards our lag measure. Schools need lag measures, don't get me wrong. You can call them KPIs or whatever. I'm just using the term lag, but lead measures help us look at it. So, for example, if we wanted to have a study score of 35, then maybe our lead measure might be that we want 80% of our Year 12 students to have read their English text before they start their new year, because that gets us already into a state of progressing forward, and we can We can then do metrics on that. Where's that up to? What do we need to do at that point? Because our lag measure is still down the road. This is telling us what our progress is thus far and what we need to do. So I think that's where schools need to look back at and start to engage those predictive type measures so that we can start to hit those lags. And then they don't become so wishy-washy because we know that we're working towards it. That's where I'd start.
And it's interesting, Stuart, I'm thinking now, let's just zoom out in terms of governance. You've got a board full of, business people, and you've got bankers and lawyers, etc. They are often driven by that KPI. They're driven by the lag measure. They see success in a school context as that. And us, maybe educators are going, no, we're on our way and we're sort of shaping, etc. How might you sort of address that, I guess, that tension, but just hold both of those together?
Yeah. And look, that just comes down to a communication, really. Like it's about putting together a scoreboard for our boards to actually see, okay, well, what are our lag measures, and here are the leads that we're going to be doing. So come first board meeting of the year. And we've just worked out that students, we only got 75% instead of 80% of our students had read the textbook. Let's say that was one of our lead measures. Then they can see, okay, well, what's next? How are you going to rectify this now? Because we really thought that 80% was going to get us towards that 35 study score. And so I find that really helpful for boards as well to see that visually, and for even teams. In this case, the English faculty, to look at it and go, well, how can where are we in relation to those different measures, and how do we keep moving forward?
All right, Stuart, I'm going to hit you with a hard question. It's a little scenario role play.
Sure.
I'm a new principal, first year in, and I've arrived on campus to declining enrolments.
Yes.
They've dropped 200 in the last 3 years. I've got no surplus, and I've got high turnover in staff, 25% turnover in my staff.
Yep, huge.
What are you telling me, Stuart? What are you telling me to get back on track?
Give me a call.
No, this is the call. What am I doing, Stuart? I got to know. Tell me, give me the answers here.
Fantastic. Look, we'll book that flight. I'll be over in no time. Look, I think certainly I would suggest do not do anything tactical. It's like I said, we were looking at those, and the risks of being tactical in a scenario like that can really set you up for problems going forward. I would be saying, really, you need to get a compelling strategy and start to execute it as soon as possible. End of story. I think that's the only way. It's really easy to do a knee-jerk reaction in that space, and especially when time is not on your side. Maybe it's getting to the end of the year, or maybe it's getting to census time, and you're, as you say, sorry, I missed the numbers there, Luke, but I was too busy laughing at how big they were and how possible it could be. But let's say they were down significantly. It would be really easy just to jump on in there and, okay, how do we fix this? We'll drop fees. We'll even though we're a boys' school, we're letting girls now. It's not that ridiculous, but do you understand? It can have far-reaching ramifications if we jump too quickly. So yeah, certainly getting that strategy in place and then starting to execute that is the ultimate goal.
Yep. So slow down.
Sorry, can I just say? Sorry.
Yeah, slow down.
Sorry. Can I just say as well? I think that's not just and often we'll see strategy as being the fix-all for a school with problems where they're going south. I think, and this probably, if I could communicate anything, was that schools really need a strategy in every part of their growth curve. And I think they need to just kind of keep moving on with that. It's not just there as a band-aid or whatever. We need to, healthy schools will strategize and do that as part of business as usual.
And it's really interesting that, as a new CEO or a new principal coming in, there's that weight of expectation that you're going to move the dial. You're the savior.
Absolutely.
And, you're going to do that. And I think there's some great advice there to sort of slow down and don't just run to a bag of tricks. There's got to be a bit of consideration. I guess then sort of projecting that forward and sort of opening up, what do you think principals need now more than ever when it comes to strategy? What should they really be paying attention to in the future?
Trying to determine the trends. Certainly, there is so much coming at schools at the moment. AI, robotics, teacher shortages, wages, bills, government intervention, ongoing compliance, increasing risk. Look, I take my hat off to principals, to be honest. I think they have an enormous job, and I would just say, look, those are the things probably I would be focusing on looking at and spending time trying to understand how those trends will affect your school. It's easy just to brush them aside in some ways and think, well, they're going to be far down the track perhaps, but they are coming and they are going to start affecting schools going forward.
All right. Well, on that note, we are about to wrap up our hour with Stuart. But as Stuart knows, as I alluded to at the top of the show, it is time to hit my favourite segment, Matt's least favourite segment, the 6 in 60 seconds. One word or idea. I will give you a score at the end, Stuart. As you said, we do like to assess in schools. So I will be assessing you at the end. Yes. All right. You ready to roll?
Absolutely. Very excited.
All right, one educational strategy that's been underrated or overrated in the past decade.
Handwriting still has relevancy. I know that's going to affect a few people.
You didn't say if it was underrated or overrated. I'm not sure.
Definitely it's overrated.
All right. One piece of advice to an aspiring or current leader looking to sharpen their strategic thinking lens.
I think getting hold of Good to Great by Jim Collins is a good start.
The most interesting professional learning you've ever done?
Yeah, look, it'd have to be my MBA. I absolutely loved it.
Best piece of feedback or advice you've ever been given by a colleague or friend?
Sorry, can I come up with a quote that I use quite often? And this is from, and I'm not a fan, but this is from John Howard. You can't fatten a pig on market day. It has held me in great stead.
One book worth reading?
The Imagination Muscle by Albert Reid. Great book.
And one person we should interview on the podcast?
Yeah, look, I'm going to default to my business manager side here and say Mark Glover, who's the director of business at Trinity Grammar and also the chair of ASBAR. Great guy, excellent ideas.
I think that might be the second time we've had him recommended, but we should look that up. Well, Stuart, I don't know. Kind of gave a couple of interesting questions, didn't give your own piece of feedback, just quoted. I'm going to give you 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10 today. Wow. It's a pass. Giving you a pass mark.
Wow. Hang on.
I'm feeling harsh today.
I should have set up some better lead measures on that one.
No, that's the problem with lag measures. They just go whack.
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, on that note, brings an end to our show for today. Matt, closing comments. Hit us with them. I know you've got them.
Look, I think today's conversation has been actually quite practical. There's been some quite, there's been great pieces of gold. And, I loved right at the top of the show, Stuart, you talked about Morningtide, about that notion of good intentions to great execution. And I just think that's flowed through our conversation today sort of beautifully. And that quote, real strategy starts with uncomfortable questions and marketing starts with Photoshop. I think, again, that's some sage advice, everybody out there. We've talked about it before, being able to come up with one goal to set up a strategic plan. That is harder than you'll ever know, but gives great clarity, particularly when you're looking at that niche concept. I'm sure Luke will love it, but we love the time cone today. It's just a great way of sort of describing how we move from tactics, strategy, vision, and systems. Some of us can actually do do that, but some people need to be sort of taken through that. So I really appreciated that, and just that affirming of lag and lead measures in the form of a scorecard. It's something we've both done in our roles, and just how important that is to communicate to all stakeholders. So I really appreciated that today. Luke, what have you got?
Oh, Matthew, you stole a couple of mine again. Definitely love the quote, uncomfortable questions. Good strategy starts with the uncomfortable question. And I think sometimes in an executive or a council, sometimes like people are a bit not comfortable asking that uncomfortable question.
Very true.
And I think that's a challenge for creating the culture where you can create the safe space for the uncomfortable questions to be asked, and that's of each other sometimes, and of the school more broadly. And sometimes as an executive, that's of your principal or your chair, and might not be things that they want to hear, but being able to ask that uncomfortable question to uncover where, like, more deeply what you're trying to achieve or the DNA of a school. And I think that's super important. As you would know, listening to the show, Stuart, Matt loves a good framework. So it's of no surprise that he loves the time cone. And little do you all know out there that Matt will have that drawn out on his whiteboard by about 9:45 this morning.
Perfect.
And he'll be using it for the next week in his meetings until we record next week's episode, where he gets a new framework and then has a new something on his whiteboard. But do love the time cone. And I guess for me, it's that relation to what you described as the tactics over the first 2 years, and it really becoming an action plan. And is it really a strategy if it's just an action plan? That's kind of probably a little bit debatable. But then as it moves out of that into that 2 to 5 years kind of zone and becoming more of, your strategies in the long run, how that turns from 5 to 10 into visions. And then, as you said, 10 plus years, your systems evolution, and never kind of taking your eye off that longer term vision, potentially, particularly for principals who ideally and leadership teams who want to be in somewhere for 5 to 10 years, if not longer, but kind of keeping that eye on the prize, like that description that you gave of if we're going to cut fees from 10,000 to 7,000, well, when that next principal, the principal after that, is now going, we're 5K under or 8K under all our competitor schools because of a decision that was made 14 years ago. Got to have thought that through. So super important in that. So those are probably the main parts for me, and really love the conversation. So thank you for giving up your time to be on the podcast. Stuart, any closing comments from yourself, and where can people find you if they want to find you on the internet?
Firstly, I just want to say I really take my hat off to you guys who are running this podcast. I think it is a absolute gem of a resource for educators. So probably don't get enough recognition, both of you, but I think you so deserve it. So thanks so much for having me on. I'm honoured to be part of it. It's lovely. And if people want to find me, they can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm there, basically 24/7. So more than welcome to touch base.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for being on the show. And for the audience out there, if you haven't already subscribed to the show, and you probably have yourself and probably a couple of your colleagues who do need to sharpen their strategic thinking, well, this is the episode for them. Pass it on to them for sure. Maybe you actually need to pass it on to your principal and make sure they listen to ed leaders and are doing their own strategic thinking, and maybe need to reach out to Stuart for some help with that. Thanks again to the sponsors of today's show, Principals HQ. Be grateful if you could check out the website at principalshq.com.au, as they help to make this professional learning free for you. You can connect with ed leaders, both Matt and I, on LinkedIn. We'll keep you up to date with the latest of what we're up to. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Go well.